The Prime Minister says Donald Trump has personally assured him Australia's refugee deal with the United States is going ahead. But just hours after the President's press secretary said the US would take up to 1,250 refugees from Manus Island and Nauru, the White House backtracked, saying Mr. Trump was still thinking about it. In a moment, we'll hear from our North America correspondent Zoe Daniel. But first, here's political editor Chris Uhlmann in Canberra.
Chaos seems to be the early hallmark of the Trump administration, but despite mixed messages from the White House, Australian officials have been told by their US counterparts that they have an order from the President to get on with settling refugees from Australia's Pacific detention centres. North America correspondent Zoe Daniel has the story.
Good afternoon.
In the White House briefing, it appeared to be a clear answer to a detailed question. Is the Turnbull-Obama deal to accept people from Australian offshore detention centres still on?
So the deal specifically deals with 1,250 people that are mostly in, I think, Papua New Guinea being held. Those people, part of the deal is that they have to be vetted in the same manner that we're doing now. There will be extreme vetting applied to all of them.
And according to new Secretary of Homeland Security John Kelly, that extreme vetting would involve the following.
It might be certainly an accounting of what websites they visit. It might be telephone contact information so that we can see who they're talking to.
So far, so good. Confirmation that America would honour the deal. Then again, they may not. Because in a phone call to the ABC hours later, a different White House official said the President himself is in fact still considering whether to go ahead. And if he does, it'll only be because of the long-standing relationship with Australia. Donald Trump had vowed to run the country like a business, and that may well be contributing to the confusion as he tries to control the method and the messaging amid such vast changes across so many policy areas. He's also being criticised for some of his decisions, like involving Chief Strategist Steve Bannon in national security, and accusations, though denied, that he's failed to fully brief key appointees like the Secretaries of Defence and Homeland Security. But ever the controller of the national conversation, he's turned it again by bringing forward the announcement of his new nominee for the Supreme Court.
Judge Gorsuch has outstanding legal skills, a brilliant mind, tremendous discipline, and has earned bipartisan support.
An intellectual conservative known for backing religious rights, Neil Gorsuch made his name defending a literal interpretation of the Constitution. At 49, he's the youngest Supreme Court nominee in more than 20 years.
I pledge that if I am confirmed, I will do all my powers permit to be a faithful servant of the Constitution and laws of this great country.
Judge Gorsuch faces a potentially contentious confirmation battle, with some Senate Democrats already planning to block his nomination, a fight the President is willing to have. Zoe Daniel, ABC News, Washington.
Malcolm Turnbull is now sweating on his refugee deal holding, and it's just one of many international and domestic challenges that lie ahead. The Prime Minister laid out his plans today. Here's National Affairs correspondent Greg Jenner.
Full of confidence and delighted to be here. Not for a moment could Malcolm Turnbull contemplate a Donald Trump about-face. He's got a refugee deal.
The Trump administration has committed to progress with the arrangements to honour the deal.
And he expects it to stick.
And that was the assurance the President gave me when we spoke on the weekend.
Nor is the timing or extremity of US security checks of any great concern.
Vetting will always be rigorous, and that's always been part of the agreement.
Finishing what he started with Barack Obama and ending the long languish of refugees in the Pacific is just one benchmark for success the Prime Minister's setting himself this year. Childcare rebate changes coupled with welfare cuts stalled for 2 years are storming back to the Senate, and the promised $50 billion in company tax cuts getting a marketing makeover directed at employees, not business owners.
Full-time workers on average weekly earnings would have an extra $750 in their pockets.
This is Malcolm Turnbull's crumbs from a rich man's table economics.
The tax cut's one of many power struggles the coalition's taking on in 2017. Electricity, and where it comes from, is another.
And that's why energy will be a defining debate in this Parliament. We're determined to help families and businesses by making electricity affordable and reliable.
He wants more gas-fired power to feed the grid, more energy storage through hydro schemes, and a rethink on coal with new, cleaner-burning plants.
If anyone had a vested interest in showing that you could do really smart, clean things with coal, it'd be us, wouldn't you?
The energy battle will be a bold one, but on other fronts, government and opposition are converging. Like Bill Shorten, Malcolm Turnbull gets that there's been a loss of faith in politics and that more accountability for parliamentarians and their parties is a must to reverse it. So what about that hefty donation to fund last year's Liberal campaign?
My donations to the Liberal Party have been regular and generous, and I'd encourage others to do the same.
It hasn't yet shown up in public declarations.
Well done, mate. Thanks, mate.
Greg Jennett, ABC News, Canberra.
Back to political editor Chris Yorman in Canberra. Chris, let's start with the US refugee deal. Why is there so much confusion about this agreement?
Because, Karina, it reflects the chaos inside the White House and apparently a heated debate over whether or not this deal should have been honoured at all, because it cuts against the message of what the tough travel bans the administration has just imposed. Now, but what do we know? Well, we know that it was a deal struck between the Prime Minister and the President in a telephone call, and that US officials have been told to get on with it and make it happen. So it does appear to be in motion, but it is fragile, and the government recognises that, and that explains why Malcolm Turnbull was so loath to criticise the President's travel bans. And for those that say that he should have, they need to measure this. Would one moment of megaphone diplomacy been more important than the future of 1,250 refugees?
And Chris, Malcolm Turnbull gave his first major speech of the year today. What did we learn about his priorities for 2017?
Well, that his priorities for this year aren't greatly different from what they were for last year, but he is trying to join the dots and show how his agenda will be important for families and for workers. Now, he wants to have this fight over jobs, but he has to leap the high hurdle of trying to convince people that the way to get more wages and more jobs is to give a $50 billion tax cut to businesses. Now, that's not an argument that the government prosecuted very well during the election campaign. He wants to have the fight over energy security and energy costs, but if the government's to win that one, then they'll have to prosecute it better than they did at the end of the year. And above all, he's trying to restore some sort of faith in a broken Australian political system and confidence that he's a leader for the times. And Karina, these times would test the best of leaders, internationally and domestically. The events of this year will be the making or the breaking of Malcolm Turnbull.